Today's crisis began in the 1930s, when Republicans who detested the business regulation in President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal began to flirt with the idea of making a formal alliance with two wings of the Democratic Party to stand against it. They turned to Southern Democrats, who hated that New Deal programs were not overtly segregationist, and Westerners, who disliked the idea of the federal government protecting land and water. Those contemplating the alliance used the word conservative to signify their opposition to the New Deal. They insisted that a government that answered to the needs of ordinary Americans was a dangerous, radical experiment. This was not an accurate description of conservatism. It was a political position. In the 1920s, Republicans had taken control of both Congress and the White House from progressive-era Democrats. They turned the government over to businessmen, believing that they would reinvest their money as only they knew best, providing jobs for workers and exciting products for a new middle class. At first, as the nation's new, glossy magazines advertised refrigerators and radios, stockings and speedboats, those policies seemed miraculous. But then the Great Crash of 1929 and the Great Depression that followed it revealed how poorly distributed the nation's paper prosperity had been. FDR, then the Democratic governor of New York, warned that the Republican system worked only for those at the top. Democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than their democratic state itself, he later explained. That, in its essence, is fascism. Ownership of government by an individual, by a group, or by any other controlling private power. He told the American people they deserved a New Deal. Desperate to break out of the Depression, Americans embraced FDR's promise to use the federal government to protect ordinary Americans. In 1932, they elected him president and put Democrats in charge of Congress. In place of businessmen, Democrats brought into the government new voices, like law professors and economic advisors, a so-called brain trust. Crucially, FDR also turned to Francis Perkins, who brought to the table the idea that the federal government should protect workers and women and children. A well-educated social worker, Perkins was a descendant of a colonial family and had spent significant time in a small town in Maine. In 1911, she had witnessed New York City's horrific Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, in which 146 workers, mostly young women, leaped to their death from a burning building after their bosses had locked the doors to keep them from sneaking brakes on the fire escapes. The catastrophe inspired Perkins to bring the idea of old-fashioned community responsibility to the government, addressing the working conditions in rapidly growing cities with their immigrant populations and their unregulated industries. Recognizing the growing power of women in the Democratic coalition and eager to understand the needs of marginalized Americans, FDR named Perkins to his cabinet as Secretary of Labor. The first woman in a presidential cabinet, she served from 1933 to 1945, making her the longest-serving labor secretary in U.S. history. To get rid of the financial free-for-all that had sparked the Great Crash and the Great Depression, Congress regulated the stock market and limited the ability of bankers to use depositors' money to speculate in stocks. It also set maximum weekly hours and minimum wages for workers, 44 hours and 25 cents an hour, and prohibited child labor. It guaranteed workers the right to join unions. It provided jobs for the unemployed, and it raised tax rates on the wealthy. Congress also provided jobs programs for workers thrown into the streets by the Depression and created a basic social safety net, the centerpiece of which was Perkins's Social Security Act, for women and children and workers out of a job from unemployment or retirement. Finally, the government invested heavily in infrastructure, bringing to ordinary Americans new opportunities previously available only to the wealthy. From the first, FDR's New Deal included, imperfectly but included, Black Americans and women.